The biggest island in the world is very thinly populated. In fact, it has the world's lowest population density. Yet, since modern times, it has been of high interest to the superpowers for a variety of reasons, ranging from natural resources to its strategic location in the Arctic. Hi, you're listening to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we're going to talk about Greenland, its history, and the reasons behind the sudden interest in Greenland from the superpowers. Incidentally, this icy island came to be known as Greenland because of a marketing ploy from one of its initial explorers. Around the year 982, Eric the Red, a Viking explorer, was banished from Iceland for manslaughter. So he sailed west and discovered this massive island. The south of this island had some green areas from vegetation, but it was mostly covered with ice. But to encourage settlement, he strategically named it Greenland, believing that the name would draw a lot of people to the island. The name stuck, but it's called Kalayit Nunaat, meaning land of the Kalaits, by the indigenous Inuits. The original settlers in Greenland were the Canadian Inuits. And how did they make it to Greenland? Well, the waters of the Thule Channel froze, creating an ice bridge connecting the Canadian Arctic islands to Greenland. And this allowed the Canadian Inuits to migrate to Greenland on foot. And since they already had experience living in the frigid temperatures, the Canadian Inuits did not have any issue adjusting to the Greenlandic climate. Over time, Norwegians too made it to Greenland. But they ultimately perished because they did not have the tools to survive the harsh winters. By tools, I mean the strategy to tackle this year-long harsh climate. The Norwegians moved inland and tried to survive on cultivation. But the winters made it impossible to cultivate. So this was not a sustainable strategy. The Inuits, on the other hand, survived by adapting to the seasonal patterns. During summer, they did stay inland, like the Norwegians, and hunted the caribou. But with the onset of winter, they moved outward along the coast. Living in the Greenlandic coastal areas was crucial for hunting seals, walruses, and whales, which provided food, fuel, and materials for clothing and shelter. The Inuit used tools like kayaks, harpoons, and dog sleds for navigating the coasts and exploiting the diverse marine life. So by the year 1500, as a result of their superior survival skills, the Inuit were the only survivors in Greenland. Whoa, interesting. So by the year 1500, the Inuit are the only settlers in Greenland. Then where does Denmark come in? That is a very interesting story, so stay tuned. During the 16th and 17th centuries, driven by a high demand for whale oil, Dutch and English whalers significantly expanded into Greenland waters. The Dutch discovered abundant bowhead whales off Svalbard and the Greenland Sea, which was the start of commercial whaling in that region. By the 18th century, both the English and the Dutch whalers had moved into the Davis Strait to hunt in the open ice. The Davis Strait is along the southwest coast of Greenland. So what was the impact on the local Inuit from the whaling operations during the 16th and the 17th centuries? The whaling operation was operated like a full-fledged trade network, and there was exchange of goods like glass beads, metal tools, and other European items for the local products. The glass beads are now an integral part of Inuit clothing. There was also an element of cultural exchange, which led to intermarriage between European whalers, especially the Dutch, and Inuit women. And this resulted in genetic mixing, which is evident even today. The Inuit began incorporating European metals and tools, resulting in technological advancements to their hunting techniques. Also, trading hubs and almost permanent settlements developed around the whaling areas, and this led to a minor shift within the Inuit towards more permanent settlements. So it appears that the relationship between the Inuit and the European whalers was fairly balanced from both a trade and cultural exchange point of view. But all this was to change significantly when Denmark woke up to the opportunity in this region. So in 1721, the Kingdom of Norway-Denmark, yes, these two countries were united at that time, granted permission to a Norwegian missionary, Hans Eje, to establish a Lutheran mission and a trading company near present-day Nuuk. Unknown to the Inuit at that time, this was the start of the colonial era in Greenland. While Hans Eje was busy converting Greenlanders to Christianity, in 1774, the Danish government acquired shares in the trading company, forming the KGH, or the Royal Greenland Trading Department. This led to Greenland trade coming directly under Danish state control. 2 years later, in 1776, a royal decree was issued by the Danish government granting the KGH complete monopoly over trade in Greenland. This meant that any country wanting to conduct trade activities with Greenland had to go through the Danish entity, the KGH. Wait, so Denmark quietly colonized Greenland and none of the Western powers had any issue? Well, the colonization was noted, but at that time, Greenland was considered an area of very low economic value. It did not possess any exploitable natural resources, and also Denmark did not threaten any key shipping lanes in that area. And most importantly, Great Britain itself was desperately trying to hold on to its American territories to be bothered about the Danish colonization of Greenland. But Denmark provided a very interesting and fascinating justification of the colonization of Greenland. Listen carefully, because we will be evaluating this later in the program. Denmark claimed that the monopoly was to protect traditional Greenlandic culture and the Inuit from outside corruption. And they used this to justify restricting Greenlanders to specific roles like hunting and fishing. So the Western powers did not oppose the colonization of Greenland. But what about the Greenlanders themselves? Did they launch any resistance to the Danish occupation? Not really, and there was a reason for that. Unfortunately, the Inuit communities lacked an overarching political structure to organize a large-scale military opposition to the colonization. And the population of Greenland itself in 1776 was just around 5,000, and it was scattered across the southern and western coasts. But the year 1867 was the first time a foreign power showed interest in Greenland. The foreign power? The United States. In 1867, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. And immediately after, Seward ordered a detailed survey of the ice-capped island of Greenland. The U.S. at that time was thinking about expanding control over North America and the Arctic. And regions like Canada, Greenland, Iceland were part of that expansion. Oh, interesting. So are we saying that President Donald Trump's interest in these regions seems to have been influenced by the thinking of William Seward? It is possible. And the Greenland survey, ordered by William Seward, projected Greenland as a land of abundance. The survey indicated that Greenland had vast quantities of sea life like whale, walrus, seal, shark, salmon, etc. And coal was found on the west coast at various points. The coal was cheaply mined and close to good harbors. And when it came to minerals, Greenland had vast quantities of cryolite, something Seward felt could be a game changer in the future. So what happened? Well, by 1868, the purchase of Alaska was being mocked in newspapers across the United States. It was branded Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, and Andrew Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. Congress and the American public did not share Seward's appetite for frozen territories, and this purchase proposal of Greenland ultimately fizzled. 42 years later, in 1910, the US once again showed interest in Greenland. This time, it was the US ambassador to Denmark, Maurice Egan, who came up with the proposal. At that time, Denmark was still reeling under the loss of a valuable territory called Schleswig-Holstein to Germany in 1864. Keeping that in mind, Maurice Egan came up with a three-way land swap proposal that he felt would make all sides happy. So under his proposal, Denmark would cede Greenland to the United States. In exchange, the US would give Denmark a cluster of the islands in the Philippines, which it controlled. And Denmark, in turn, would give these Philippine islands to Germany in exchange for the return of the territory Schleswig-Holstein back to Denmark. Maurice Egan himself called this plan an audacious suggestion. But the US government agreed. But with the outbreak of World War I, this plan fizzled, but it laid the groundwork for the US purchase of the Danish West Indies from Denmark in 1917 for $25 million in gold. The Danish West Indies, now known as the US Virgin Islands. So just for the record, the US has purchased territory from Denmark in the past. At the start of World War II, in 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and placed it under Nazi occupation. At that time, Denmark still ruled Greenland, so there was concern in the US that Germany would invade Greenland too, and that would provide Germany with a North American base for operations. So in 1941, the US Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, signed the Defense of Greenland Treaty with Denmark's ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C. The treaty gave the responsibility for Greenland's defense to the United States during the war, and the US military the right to build any facilities to land its planes. And Greenland proved to be a massive strategic asset during World War II. The Pentagon realized that Greenland was actually the world's largest stationary aircraft carrier, and it housed some very important weather stations of strategic value. So once again, in 1946, after World War II, William Trimble, a State Department envoy to Europe, proposed paying Denmark $100 million in gold in exchange for Greenland. Denmark was shocked and upset at this offer. Gustav Rasmussen, the Danish foreign minister, told the US ambassador to Denmark, "While we owe much to America, I do not feel that we owe them the whole island of Greenland." The US backed down, but in 1951, it signed a new treaty with Denmark that gave American military latitude to use Greenland as its base for Arctic operations. And this interaction post-World War II is what President Donald Trump often refers to as the United States being nice enough to return Greenland to Denmark post-World War II. As a result of the 1951 agreement, the US built a massive air base at Thule which housed about 10,000 American troops at the peak of the Cold War. Since Greenland was in the middle between the United States and the Soviet Union, the Thule Air Base gave the capability to the US military of a rapid response to any nuclear threats from the Soviets. In 1953, though, the Danes pulled off what I would call the heist of the decade. Just like they had quietly colonized Greenland, in 1953, Denmark quietly, via a unilateral decision, transitioned Greenland from a colony to a district of Denmark. There was no referendum in Greenland when this transition happened, and the legality of this takeover by Denmark was debated in the United Nations for quite some time. So Greenland, being a part of Denmark, is definitely up for debate. But after the transition, there was significant pushback from the Greenlandic community towards self-governance. And in 1979, due to the local demands for greater autonomy, the 1979 Home Rule Act was passed by Denmark, giving Greenland full autonomy and control over areas like education, health, and fisheries, while Denmark retained control over foreign policy and defense. And just for the record, the Home Rule Act was approved by a 70% majority in the local referendum. In 1985, Greenland left the European Union after a dispute over fishing rights. Basically, the Greenlanders did not want the rest of Europe infringing in their local areas for fishing and taking away what the Greenlanders felt was rightfully theirs. So after the withdrawal from the European Union, the surrounding areas of Greenland were once again accessible only to the Greenlanders for fishing. And as bizarre as it may sound, Denmark is still an EU member, but Greenland isn't. Now, earlier in the podcast, I had talked about Denmark justifying its occupation and monopoly control of Greenland by saying that it was trying to protect the Inuit identity and culture within Greenland. Well, all that came under a heavy scanner in May of 2022 when it was revealed that between 1966 and 1970, approximately 4,500 Inuit women and girls were fitted with an IUD as part of a Danish government-approved policy to curb the native population of Greenland. That was approximately half of the women and girls of childbearing age within that period. And it took the Danish Prime Minister 3 years to issue a formal apology to the victims of this forced contraception, which continued all the way till 1991. So it almost appears that President Donald Trump has some valid arguments with respect to challenging Danish control over Greenland. But what is being missed in this melee is the will of the people of Greenland, aka a referendum. And with the Greenlanders acquiring full autonomy, they do possess the right to request a referendum from the Kingdom of Denmark. Then why haven't they asked for it yet? The reason: economic sustainability. Greenland, though vast, has a population of just 57,000 as compared to Denmark's 5.9 million. So it is very reliant on Denmark for a lot of economic assistance that keep the economy going. So Greenland turning completely independent may not happen in the short term. However, it could push for more autonomy and take on the foreign affairs responsibility away from Denmark, and that could allow Greenland to enter into multilateral contracts with other nations focused on trade and foreign policy. And it is here that the United States could also bid for one of these bilateral or multilateral contracts. But the starting point has to be the will of the Greenlanders. How do they see this massive Arctic island shaping its destiny for the future? An island with a population of about 57,000, which is 90% Inuit, around 8% Danish, and the rest other smaller groups. And on that note, we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. Which American car manufacturer's worst performing plant was transformed into a profitable entity after Toyota took it over in the 1980s? Toyota turned around a notoriously bad GM plant in Fremont, California, starting in 1984 through a joint venture called NUMMI, transforming it from one of the worst performing factories due to low quality and high absenteeism into one of the best by implementing the Toyota production system. So the answer is A, General Motors. Question for the current episode. Which of the following is true about Greenland? A, people own more boats than cars in Greenland. B, tourism is the backbone of Greenlandic economy. C, Greenland is the least densely populated territory in the world. Or D, the capital of Greenland is Copenhagen. Once again, which of the following is true about Greenland? A, people own more boats than cars in Greenland. B, tourism is the backbone of the Greenlandic economy. C, Greenland is the least densely populated territory in the world. Or D, the capital of Greenland is Copenhagen. Just a hint, multiple options could be true, and the answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in today's episode. Hope you enjoyed and found insightful this overview of Greenland. We'll meet again in 2 weeks with another interesting and exciting episode on world history. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.